am most thankful to have Emma talk about sexual intimacy.
Thanks. So I asked the
Turn off your
leaders
phones, please. Excuse me.
to do a Q&A, ask questions that you guys were interested in being addressed. And so what I did is a lot of the questions were actually very similar, which I also see in my office. So that's great because there's a normalcy there. So I categorized them into 3 different points so that it wasn't so overwhelming. And then I tried to address those points within these 3 categories. So hopefully I answer your question tonight. If not, maybe I can answer it later too. So I'll talk about, under each category, I'll talk about why it's a problem, what we can do to help, and then I'll actually have you guys break up into your couple, your partnership, and work on an exercise together, and then we'll come back to do the next point. So it'll be a little different maybe than what you've experienced in some of the other sessions. But first I wanted to start out with my story. Did anybody go to the sex hacks, the life hacks sex thing? Okay, so some of you guys have heard this story because Brian wanted me to get very vulnerable. So I did, because that's what you do when you're in sex therapy. Thanks. So my story, my husband and I, when we got married, we were virgins and we were really excited about getting married, specifically for sex. So I wasn't even legal to drink whenever I got married. So we were very excited. We dated for about a year and then we decided to do like a 5-month engagement because we wanted to rush that engagement process for sex because we were really excited. So we get up to the honeymoon, the night that we got married. We had an early wedding, so we ended at 5, so that we could go to the hotel. We were like, peace. So we went to the hotel, and we were super pumped to have these amazing multiple orgasms all night long that people were talking about, and to fulfill our wildest dreams, only to find out that that was not what was happening. And we ended up just ordering dessert and laying in bed, which was super delicious. If you ever go down to the Cincinnati Inn, it's really great food. So that started a long journey for us of realizing sex isn't actually what we thought it was going to look like. And we ended up spending a good 3 years trying to figure out what is intercourse going to look like for us, because intercourse wasn't working. We ended up having, well, we, meaning I, but it was really the partnership, had this condition called vaginismus where intercourse was difficult or sometimes impossible to happen. And so we had to end up looking at intimacy and sexual intimacy in a very different way than what we thought it would be like, such as intercourse. It was cool though, because we had to ask God, what is this going to look like since we're not able to have intercourse the way that we thought we were going to? How can we look to you to figure out what is that going to look like for our relationship? And it made us invite him into our sex life, which was really, it was weird. But also to get to know him through sex and understand him more through sex, which is very powerful for us. So if you think about it, sex, God and his character has to do with being playful and creative and fun and inventive. And so that's what we had to do with sex as well. And that made it very intimate and more connecting for us, more than maybe you would have if we thought about it as sex equals penis and vagina, meaning like intimacy in that way. So we spent that 3 years thinking we weren't having a bad sex life or a sexual intimacy experience. It was actually really great for us, even though we weren't able to have intercourse. And so that helped us define what sexual intimacy looked like, different than what we thought it was going to look like, and really brought us closer to God in a spiritual, sexual way. So then to fast forward, that also helped me get into the sex therapy field because it was interesting. I felt like I could really empathize with a lot of my clients and understand, and I investigated a lot. And I couldn't find a lot of therapists who wanted or understood what we were going through enough, and so it propelled me to want to investigate and research and help other people in this area. But along the way in our journey, it didn't stop. We continued to have to talk and discuss and figure out what was this going to look like, because it continued to come back, it continued to ebb and flow. We got pregnant, it was great, but then we had a lot of complications afterwards and we weren't able to have intercourse again. So what was that going to look like now that we're exhausted, all the hormones that come with that postpartum piece? We were told that we actually weren't going to be able to have pleasurable sex again and possibly not be able to have a baby. So what were we gonna do with that information? And so we were kind of relied back on what happened whenever we were first married and brought God. I mean, he was always a part of our sex life, but really trying to grieve through that process and figure out how are we going to incorporate new creativity into our sexual intimacy piece. What was cool about this next phase is that we relied on community, because God says we shouldn't do things in isolation. These things specifically, secrets in our relationships and in our lives, like it's meant to be in community. So we relied on our mom's groups and our father's groups, and they became our prayer warriors around this area. And it was really cool because a year after that point, we somehow, through a lot of work and a lot of playfulness, ended up getting pregnant and had successful intercourse, which was great. We got pregnant on the first time, so that was interesting. And so that's where we are today. I'm currently pregnant. But that's to say that just because I'm an expert in this field doesn't mean that I don't also struggle, and that our relationship doesn't also struggle with this. It only helps our situation, it helps our ministry, it helps my practice in understanding, okay, I kind of get a feel for what people are going through in an empathetic way, but also clinically, how can I continue to research this for my clients and for the community, because this is what I'm going through too. But really trying to focus on that sexual intimacy piece, getting to know the partner, him getting to know me, and it being less about orgasm, performance, the physical piece, and more about connecting and nurturing each other through sexual intimacy. So that's a part of the background of why I get very passionate about this area, but also because I don't feel like it's talked about a lot, and so there's a lot of shame that gets built up around it, and I feel like we need to release some of that shame and come together as community to be able to talk about it so that we can heal just from that area too. So there is a scripture that I think is probably one of the most hated and loved scriptures around sex. It's 1 Corinthians 7:3-5. It's not on the screen. But it is, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife and her husband, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other. Does this verse, or did this verse ever make anybody cringe a little bit? Like, I get really tense sometimes whenever I think about it. But do you guys know Douglas Rosenau? Have you heard that name? He's one of the pioneers in Christian sex therapy. And I really like what he says about this verse in terms of, he takes this and says, this really highlights sex being about frequency, and that sex is supposed to be ongoing even if we're not wanting it. Because God created sex for a reason. He created it for us to be one. He created it for a certain connection that sometimes we don't understand because the outside world is influencing, whether it's exhaustion or the busyness of life or whatever that looks like. And so having this verse be something more about holiness and reflecting and understanding God's nature through us connecting as a partner, I think shifts our mind into something that feels more controlling and abusive to something that is connecting from what God intended sex to look like. But also, I think this gets too isolated, this Corinthians verse, because around it, there is this other one, 1 Corinthians 13, 4-5 and 7. Love is patient, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, and it always perseveres. So this I love, too, in conjunction with this other verse, because it says and it points to what would it be like if I focused on what my partner needs versus what I'm not getting, or what my needs are specifically, and why my partner isn't meeting my needs. How can I turn towards my partner and be a team player versus an individual within the coupleship fighting for my rights and fighting for my side? What would it look like to turn and to say, how can I make you feel most loved and cared for? How can I be patient and not self-seeking, always trust and hopeful, and model that behavior of selflessness? In conjunction with, it's good to also have sex and have conversation and intimacy frequently. So I point that out because I want that to be a basis for the discussion moving forward, that if we can think about it as a team and think about my partner more so than like what I'm not getting, I think it switches our perspective and our vision around sexual intimacy and the coupleship too. So then there's this book called Celebration of Sex, which Douglas Rosenau wrote, and I think it's an excellent book that matches a ton of different sexual information with scripture. And so if you're interested in it, it has a guidebook too, and I've thought about maybe leading a group around it just because I think it has a lot of wonderful theology hooked in with the sexual intimacy piece and education. So if you and your partner are looking to expand in this area, I would encourage you to get it. But this passage I also think was a good foundation. Your union is based on love, humility, gentleness, and trust. Your trust is well-founded because each of you reaches out and lovingly nurtures the other as carefully as you would watch out for your own body. In this union, you look honestly at your own rough edges and shortcomings and humbly try to change them. So that's like looking at myself instead of like what my partner isn't doing. You choose to give us precious gifts, the things that your mate desires and needs. It is a marvelous atmosphere for fun sexual relating and intimate connecting, when this kind and tenderness, trust, genuine empathy, and cooperating abound. So again, being a partner, a team player, trying to look at what are my partner's needs and how can I step outside of my comfort zone. I know you guys did love languages before, so I might not cognitively be in that place of like, oh yeah, my partner might want a gift. I have to really reach for it and think about what are they specifically needing and how can I go out of maybe what is considered my comfort zone to provide that. And that a certain joy can come from trying to love my partner in that way because I know what it does for them. So then again, how can I make my partner feel most loved and cared for versus what is my partner not doing to me, and trying to shift that mindset. So one of the areas that was mentioned a lot with questions is talking about sex and how difficult it can be to talk about sex. So this is difficult for a number of different reasons. It can be incredibly awkward. It can be because we weren't modeled this. It's not like our parents sat us down for a lot of us and said, this is how you talk about sex, or let me talk to you about sex, or this is what healthy sexuality looks like, or these are ways to protect yourself, or a number of different reasons. What I hear in my office is that typically there are like crickets. There's nothing that is said, or there are, you don't talk about this in public, don't talk about this at all. And so there's, even in the silence, there's shame that kind of gets built up around sex, and that there's something about it that because we're not talking about it, it's bad, and so I don't know how to talk about it in my relationship, so we don't talk about it because I equate it as bad or wrong for whatever reason. It could also be because I don't know how to talk about it, meaning I don't know where to start in talking about sex. I don't even know where to begin that conversation, or what kind of questions to ask, or what to even say to my partner. I've had a number of different individuals who come, one specifically who had erectile dysfunction with his partner. They hadn't had sex for a while, but he was coming in as an individual and wasn't talking to his wife about it, his partner about it. And so he came for a good 6 months, and our whole focus was talk to your partner about the difficulties you're having, and that you feel when she responds when you don't get an erection, that's really hurtful to you. Like, what would it be like? And he's like, no, I'm a tough Boston, person. I can't do that. And so eventually he talked to her about it and the erectile dysfunction went away. And I'm like, that's awesome, that's so great. But sometimes I think just getting over that hump and being able to discuss some of these really vulnerable, intimate pieces can be challenging because we don't know how our partner is going to respond, and we don't know if we're going to be accepted or rejected, or maybe we have been rejected before, and so that feels scary to even go to that place. So one thing that in talking about sex is I say it's hard to be intimate if we can't be vulnerable, and that you have to be able to be vulnerable to be intimate. Otherwise it's typically a false intimacy. And so if we can't be vulnerable, there's usually shame that's in front of that. So how can we work through that shame to be able to get to a place to be vulnerable, to then be intimate? So trying to ask yourself, what's holding me back from talking to my partner, and how can I start addressing some of those pieces? One of the pieces in your workbook is around the sexual response cycle. And the sexual response cycle from Masters and Johnson says that sexual response is linear, meaning we have desire, and then we have arousal, and then we have this flow of arousal that heightens, and then we have orgasm, which is the peak. And sometimes for women, like they would say orgasm might like have a wave of multiple orgasms, but for men it would peak, and then you have this refractory period where you can't get an erection for a little while, but women can have multiple orgasms and then like have a refractory period, and then you have to wait for a certain time for that to happen again, typically for men. There's new research that's come out that says actually it's more cyclical than that, and that our sexual response system is really not based on this performance of physical, what your physical body is doing, but instead based on intimacy in the environment and needing foreplay. And sometimes when you're in the moment, you hear your baby, or you hear the dogs barking, or something comes up about things you need to do, and then all of a sudden you're not aroused anymore and everything has shut off. So how do I get back into the moment? And so the cyclical idea of being able to translate that and communicate that to your partner. When this happens, I need you to, lessen the pressure here, or harden the pressure here, or I need you to touch me here, or I like it better when you do a soft kiss and then get more aggressive. Being able to talk about your sexual response system and cycle of what works for you and what doesn't work for you is going to allow you to come closer together and connect better when you're able to transfer that information to your partner, because everybody's different. So past partners that you've had aren't going to be the same as your current partner. So how do I get to know your body, your cycle, and how can I communicate what works for me and what I like and what I don't like and what do I want to experiment with? So that's one reason why talking about sex can be good. Sometimes it's difficult to even say the words though, like vulva, penis, testicle. So how am I going to have a conversation if I don't have the vocabulary or feel comfortable with the vocabulary? There's a verse in Philippians 1, 9 through 10. I didn't put up any of the other verses, I'm just going to say. And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best. So trying to understand from a sex education point of view of what is my body? Like, how do I understand my body? How can I learn about my body? How can I express that to my partner? How can I even have language to talk to my partner about that? Do I need something more sensual, or do I like it when it is more vulgar, or does that really turn me off and I cannot handle when you ask if you just want to have sex? Like, I need you to pursue me a little bit differently than, hey, do you want to have sex with me? Like, maybe I need a different initiation. So how can we communicate what initiation would work for us, or what initiation definitely does not work for us? So I want to practice. There's a lot of information about talking about sex. So I want to practice. The first exercise is, if your partner's here, turn to your partner, and I just want you to do something simple that is, hi, my name is blank, and I have this. I have a vulva, I have a vagina, I have a penis, and then I want you to high five each other and say, good job. Go ahead.